Ghost with Cats, Chapter 17, The Seven-Pointed Star. There was a path through the woods along the stream, to the base of the mountain. Annie opened a barred gate, and they entered a warm cave. Inside was a large carved pool. Water bubbled into it before flowing out to the stream. There were stalactites and stalagmites all around, and carved stone seats. Everywhere around them, water dripped from the darkness. Dim lights glowed in the recesses of the cave. The place imbued the feeling of healing and meditation. In a side room, Annie made Bres take off his boots, socks, and shirt before getting into the warm mineral waters in only his shorts. The water was soothing to his rapidly healing wounds. Then Vorn and Boaz got in. Vorn commented, "The healing properties of the water are very beneficial." Groaning as he lowered himself, Boaz responded, "It is the only thing keeping this old man alive." "You still have 40 years left before you reach 120. Teasing, Annie giggled. "Hush! Do not curse me, child." Boaz scowled with grandfatherly-like affection. Tall walked around the edge of the room. The cavern was huge. It felt familiar to him, like some place his brother had taken him once when he was young. He heard a slight splash in the water behind him. "Are y'all coming in?" Annie asked as she swam up behind him. "Yes, just trying to remember something," he answered. "What did Rabbi Jacob say to get you so quiet? Something about True?" she questioned. "Not really. He did not know True, but he told me many interesting things that I have not had the time or stillness to process." Come and float, Tall, or tomorrow your muscles will make you pay for being on a horse all day. This place was made for stillness and reflection. Some of the most powerful and influential men and women of my mother's people have come here to this place in the last century. Now it's your turn." Her voice echoed quietly around him as she floated away into the dark waters. Lowering himself into the pool, he began at the beginning, the moment Vorn walked into his sanctum room as he worked his swords. They had just finished pushing back another Jinn swarm incursion. The energy reading had been clear. He took his fastest slipper. It held 4 and came to Earth. Less than 10 days later, they arrived, holding in orbit for a day to get linguistics information and verify where on the planet the reading came from. It was a trap. As soon as they entered the atmosphere, they were pursued. He, Vorn, and Bres dropped in a pod over the desert near the reading as his pilot climbed back out of the atmosphere, sacrificing himself to save his master. Tall felt him die. In a flash of plasma, his pilot was vaporized. The 3 Eloh were captured by the humans, who seemed to be waiting for them and know how to capture their kind. Bence, the man who questioned him, did not seem to understand. It was not the technology that made him an adamant. It was Tall himself. For days, they were neither fed nor given rest. Tall felt Vorn questioned and beaten as he was. However, Vorn, as a cipher, could retreat into a state of meditation where they could not reach into his mind. It frustrated the humans and fascinated them. Bres was another matter. The human male, who was the leader of their torturers, was interested in how much pain Tal's sword pet could endure. But Tal had ordered Bres not to speak, so Bres refused to utter a single sound as they repeatedly beat him. Then Annie was brought to the compound as a prisoner too, but their captors had underestimated the tiny female's will. She killed the men holding them, then the one beating Bres, then Vorn's guard. She knew how evil their captors were, and she also knew of his people. He wondered how many others on her world knew. Certainly more of her people knew than of his people than the other way. Or was that true? His brother had known, and 3 unflagged fighter ships of his people's tech vaporized his slipper and killed his pilot. There was more than he knew going on here. Rabbi Jacob told Tal their peoples had a history reaching back thousands of years. He looked up at the ceiling. Condensation was dripping around him, clinking on the surface of the water like chimes. He could hear it and his heartbeat as he laid in the still, floating warmth. Tal realized he needed to go back further in his analysis, to a time when True was alive. He thought about his brother True, traveling backwards through each memory. His youngest brother Tom's birth was more than a year before his mother killed his father. True was there for it. A 3-year-old Tal had been with True for Taffin's birth and death, 3 years before Tol's birth. They returned after Tol's birth, then stayed on Edene for 3 years until Tom's birth, when Tal was 9. Tal remembered being with True always until he was almost 10. Then True left for over 2 years after their father's death, taking Tol and Tom with him. During those 2 years, he spent all his time with Tavi and Tranif on Edene, or with his cousins under the watchful eye of the king and queen on Eloh. True returned with Tom and Tol to make sure Tal survived his first lottery and faced the lottery himself. It was during the trip years later he saved Annie. True survived his next turn in the lottery unscathed. Even the most violent of females were unable to harm the second regent. A month after they returned home, 7-year-old Tom found their eldest brother dead in the garden of a viper bite. No viper was ever found. Also, there was what Tal now knew was a Christmas nativity card in True's writing desk. A water drop fell on Tal's cheek. He opened his eyes. On the ceiling there was a star. It had 7 points, a very curious shape. Suddenly, Tal stood up in the water. It was only chest deep. He remembered the water had once been over his head as he swam around True. His brother held him in his arms and pointed up at the star. True's voice echoed as he said it represented the perfection of the light of the one who created all. Tal had been 4 or 5 years old, and he wasn't supposed to remember swimming here, or playing in the meadow of green grass and golden flowers with the brown-haired girl who was always followed around by the giant black and white cat. Suddenly, it all seemed too impossible. His mind revolted painfully against the knowledge it wasn't supposed to recover. His body went into shock. The world spiraled into darkness and stars as he sank below the warm water into silence. "What's happening to him, Vorn?" a soft voice asked from far away. "He is having a chalom, like a waking dream. It is rare, but his brothers are regents, mystics of our people. Sometimes members of a family will share the traits of one calling with each other," the one explained. Tal's muddled mind found his identity. Talon Vorn was his cipher and oldest friend. "Why didn't he drown?" a man asked. Boaz was his name. He was the caretaker of this place. "Our people can obtain gases from inhaling liquids," Vorn answered. "Y'all can breathe underwater?" the female exclaimed. Her name was Annie Winters-Dove, and he had known her his whole life. "Bres, are you strong enough to carry him back to the house?" "Bres strong enough, Lady Annie." Bres was Tal's sword pet. "Let's get him to bed," she said firmly. Tal felt himself being carefully wrapped and lifted. "Just hold on, Tal," Annie whispered to him. He opened his eyes, blinked once, then closed his eyes again. All he was aware of was the seven-pointed star opening the door to his obscured memories. Tal woke the next day to a pair of giant golden eyes surrounded by black silk staring into his. One of the new moon spring's felines. It was mid-morning by the light through the window, but he could see nothing beyond. There was the sound of the wind roaring outside. It was snowing hard. Boaz told Vorn this weather was called a blizzard, and the obscured visibility was a full whiteout. It was Christmas Eve. 7 years ago tonight, Annie saved the world, and only a few knew. Even fewer knew his brother used a resurrection crystal to keep her alive because she was possibly the last descendant of their people living on this world. A bloodline protected after the deaths of millions. True believed she was the one to bring the light back to their people. Yet Tal feared what his brother had feared, that if she was brought back to Eloh, she would be killed because she possessed something that had been lost, and she gave it free to all, just as her mother had. It was called love. But True did not know how broken a person those events made Annie. Or did he? Something warm and soft was laying on the bed over his arm. A giant orange cat stared at him, its golden eyes unblinking as it yawned. The black cat, looking down at him, yawned too. The cat had more teeth than a hydra or viper, Tal thought. Both looked bored. The marmalade stood and stretched, revealing Annie's dark brown hair strewn across her cheek. She was asleep, holding his hand. Her carved stone pendant lay on the bed by her neck. She was half sitting in a chair by his bed. Tomorrow was her birthday, and oddly enough, his. The cat butted Annie with its giant fire-colored head, its purr loudly vibrating the air. She inhaled deeply and lifted her head, letting it rub its face against hers. "Good morning, David," she murmured sleepily to the orange cat. The black demanded her attention in kind. "Good morning, Goliath. Where's Solomon?" Annie asked. Both cats tipped their head at her as if understanding the question. She smiled, running her fingers over their pointed ears. "He's probably in the kitchen eating your breakfast," she answered herself. The silky ebony one made a plaintive sound, and both felines jumped from the bed, bounding from the room. She giggled softly as she leaned back to stretch. Her body made a crackling sound. She sighed heavily, then she noticed Tall was watching her. She made a surprised squeak. "You're awake! Oh my God, you scared me half to death," she declared in a relieved tone. "I thought you drowned." "You told me to reflect and be still," Tall replied in a dry tone, sitting up in bed. Annie looked at him, eyes wide, jaw dropping, stammering, "Oh, oh, I hate you now. I've been freaking worried all night because Vorn said you were having some kind of vision or seizure or something, and you think it's a joke?" She was shaking angrily and started to rise. But he pulled her onto the bed next to him, hugging her as she pushed him away. "Let go of me or I'm going to get a stick and beat you, I swear." He held her firmly in his arms. Bres was standing in the door, looking confused that they were fighting. Tall nudged him to leave, so he did. "Be still, Annalise. We need to speak," he ordered, and gave her a small lick on the forehead at her hairline. She tasted sweet. He laid his cheeks on her hair and breathed slowly. His long hair hung down his back. He could feel it needed to be brushed. He was not sure where to begin, so he just held her, because he needed to. She stopped struggling. Her eyes were fierce, her voice low and demanding. "Did y'all just lick me?" "You needed comfort, and so did I. Vorn said you stayed with me all night. He told you you did not need to, but you did. Why?" Tall was rocking them slightly. In a few moments, he felt her relax against him. Her anger and surprise melted into something else. "I was worried. When I worry, I pray," she responded quietly. "I felt like you were lost to me. I mean us. So I prayed. I don't know what your people believe. I'm sorry if I offended you." "I thank you for your prayers. My people once believed remarkably similar to what your Master Jesus taught. But my people have lost their way in the last several generations. It has been a difficult time, especially with the loss of heart, as my brother called it. Annalise, do you remember the first time you met my brother and I?" She looked at him strangely. "Are you sure you are okay? Maybe you breathed too much water," she said cautiously. "Annalise, Annie, think very hard about when you were very little. Do you remember the first time we met?" he insisted. "You're scaring me, Tall. We met less than 2 weeks ago," she said as she tried to rise, but he held her, looking into her eyes intensely. "We did not. I was 4 or 5, and you were a year younger."